carried. Thank you very much, Liz, for coming. All right, so now we move on to item 9, the draft submission on Taumata Arowai, the Water Services Regulator Bill. So this is our submission to this bill, which the submissions closed on March the 4th. And this, of course, is following the government inquiry into Havelock North drinking water, and one of the measures that Cabinet has agreed to implement to address the inquiry's recommendation is to establish a dedicated drinking water regulator to oversee the entire drinking water system and ensure New Zealand communities have access to safe and acceptable drinking water. All right, so look, I'll open it up to welcome staff. John.
Does everyone know Sarah? I think everyone knows John, but does everyone know Sarah?
Would you like to introduce yourself to Sarah, and then you guys will just introduce the report, the submission?
Yeah, kia ora, I'm Sarah Hemmingson. I'm Senior Advisor in Three Waters, and I'm basically working on anything to do with water policy.
Thanks. Right.
So the submission has been prepared, and as noted in the report, the bill is part of a broader package of reforms to the Three Waters regulatory system. The establishment of a dedicated drinking water regulator to oversee the entire drinking water system is one of the recommendations from the Havelock North drinking water inquiry. The main provisions in the bill establish Taumata as a Crown agent with a dedicated sustained focus on drinking water. It outlines the objectives, functions and operating principles to guide and inform how Taumata Arowai carries out its functions and duties, establishes a Maori advisory board to advise Taumata Arowai on Maori interests and knowledge as they relate to the objectives, functions and operating principles of Taumata Arowai and the duties of the board. There is nothing in the bill relating to the effectiveness of measures outlined in the objectives, functions and operating principles. The challenge has been the wide-ranging powers provided to Taumata Arowai, but no indication of the implications these powers may present to Council. Another bill, the Water Services Bill, will give effect to decisions to implement system-wide reform to the regulation of drinking water and source water, and targeted reforms to improve the regulation and performance of wastewater and stormwater networks. The Water Services Bill is expected to be introduced in early 2020. In general, the Council submission supports the intent of the bill. The submission makes recommendations on the following. It supports an independent regulator for drinking water, is concerned about the potential imbalance of focus between drinking water aspects and the stormwater and wastewater aspects from implementation of the bill. It seeks the inclusion of board members with knowledge, experience, capability in the provision and management of drinking water services and infrastructure for a regulator focused on water supply. The management of non-drinking water quality should remain with the Ministry of the Environment, driving these reforms due to the interconnectedness of water quality, ecology and biodiversity outcomes, and supports work to continue to improve these existing mechanisms. It seeks clear guidance for agencies on priorities and hierarchies to avoid the potential for competing objectives and functions of Taumata Arowai and existing legislation and government departments where they overlap. There has been sector collaboration in the development of submissions. We have shared our submission points with both Selwyn District Council and Napier City Council. Nationally, the Society of Local Government Managers and Local Government New Zealand have shared their drafts and sought sector feedback. The final drafts of these submissions have been recently received prior to final organisation or board sign-off. The Society of Local Government Managers submission expands on the points we make relating to costs, how Taumata Arowai will be funded, and lack of transparency on the likely fees and charges imposed on the regulated community. The Department of Internal Affairs Departmental Disclosure Statement states the monetarised costs are substantial and greatly exceed the monetised benefits, which does not give much comfort. A firmer statement querying the degree of statutory independence of the regulator, with it being a Crown entity. Also, board member knowledge, the need for knowledge of the drinking water supply and regulation environment. In addition, requests the board have skills in community engagement. The Local Government New Zealand submission is aligned with the Council on the potential resources and capability pressures, recommending a board member with skills in infrastructure regulation. Also noting the complexities of stormwater and wastewater and the role of the Resource Management Act in regulating water quality. The submission also notes the need to ensure there is a clear distinction between technical and economic regulation, the need for strong engagement with local government. Staff agree with the issues highlighted in both submissions and also recommend the submission include a statement that Council supports submission of Society of Local Government Managers and Local Government New Zealand on the bill.
So that's a really, really good summary, thank you. My only, Yanni, I see you've got a question. My only feeling is that we can say we support their submissions, but can we use some of the things in their submissions to strengthen ours? Because I don't think we say these things strongly enough. The cost implications, they've also recommended possibly, LGNZ have recommended the Māori Advisory Group and possibly a second advisory group, and particularly the importance of retaining local government representation on any of these groups and on the board. So there's various areas where I think we need to actually strengthen our submission to make it more, which would be easy to do if we're supporting these other two, is just to perhaps take some of their main points out and strengthen. We've actually got them in our report mainly, but they're kind of quite hidden, especially the part where I think it might be Solgum that says the costs will be picked up by third parties and suggests that the Crown could be also involved in that. We haven't actually stated that in our report. Any questions, Yanni?
Thank you. I've read through the kind of bill and I can't see where they've got the power to grant an exemption to having forced chlorination. So who's got the power to grant an exemption to mandatory chlorination or residual disinfection?
This is only about the establishment. Yeah. It's not
about their powers, actually.
That will be established by the regulator once they're set up.
Right. So there's nothing in here that talks about them being able to grant an exemption.
That will be in the, if there is anything, it'll be covered in the second bill, which goes into more detail around the roles. This is just setting out the objectives and the functions of what the regulator will do. It is not going into the detail of how it will carry out those roles and who will be responsible for that. It's very high level.
But it's assumed that they will be the ones that will have the ability to grant an exemption. And I just wonder whether in our submission, I mean, this goes back to the whole trying to work with DIA and government. From the very first conversations we've had up in the Mayor's Lounge, we've asked around having clarity around the exemption process. And we seem to have the goalposts keep shifting, and yet we still have no clarity about that process. So I think
one of the things to be clear about here is that there has been talk of an exemption, but there is no policy proposal on paper for an exemption, and nor is there any legislation, regulation or standard relating to an exemption. So our position has always been that that compliance in terms of demonstrably safe drinking water would be that we meet the requirements and the standards, and we do those through our water safety plan. I think talk of an exemption is distracting, because there may or may not be an exemption regime. In fact, that is one thing that people have been talked about, but it's there's no guarantee, and nor do I think we should talk it up and guarantee that such a regime would come into practice.
Right. So, but I think we should. I can't understand why we wouldn't make the point that we do not want to have mandatory chlorination of our water, and we want the ability to actually have the choice around meeting the standards without doing that. And I think we should
we can do that certainly. So we can say that that it's up to the water supplier to demonstrate the safe supply of drinking water, whether or not that requires residual disinfection. We could do it that way.
I think we need to be
If you
really
prefer.
clear about it, because otherwise we're just getting further and further behind getting the clawing out because of the way that these processes are going. And so what you're saying is the second bill is the opportunity where we will understand what's required.
Well, it may or may not be. I think they'll probably do it through the drinking water standards and the associated regulations. That's where the technical detail of that will be, and they will be the agency that oversees those standards and regulations.
And how transparent will that process be, and how engaged could we be in that?
Well, that'll be up to the regulator, and that is in the submission.
That is something we want to highlight, that transparency about that, and also consultation as well. Yep, thanks, Yanni. There's also, I see you've got a question in, but clarity around the other two waters, the stormwater and wastewater. I mean, the primary focus of this is drinking water. Are we saying the stormwater and wastewater should just still sit with the MFE and the RMA? I mean, LGNZ have suggested remove the words oversight of those two because it actually suggests too much.
Yeah, so
control.
the fundamental position in our submission is that the freshwater program of action, which is reforming the RMA and the standards around ensuring freshwater,
Yep.
is in flight, as it were, and should be given a chance to continue to roll out
Yes.
through the national standards, national policy statements, and then the associated plans at regional council level.
Yeah.
And that the focus for this agency should be much more on the drinking water.
Yes. So maybe strengthen that a little bit, I think, too. Anne?
Thank you. I was just looking at point number 13 in the statement about the overlap between objectives and functions of Taumata, Arowai and existing legislation and government departments. And I mean, there just seems to be an awful lot of forks in the dinner here, if that's a simple way of putting it. What would that look like? What would clear guidance look like? Into, you know, what I'm worried about is that there's an awful lot of money involved here, and there seems to be a lot of people, a lot of agencies and things involved. What would be the most helpful thing? Could we strengthen that statement up a wee bit more to say, for example, this is what would be helpful in terms, or not?
I'm not certain, to be honest, because I'm not certain where they see the drinking water assessors and the local response to incidents and events. So it depends on how they roll out their national direction and then their regional presence and then their local action.
But I think that
But we think that they should think about it a lot more and be very clear about what they're doing and how that fits with what other agencies are doing, particularly the district health boards, but maybe also the regional councils, depending
But
on how
it does come down to, again, not wanting the one-size-fits-all approach and retaining that local input.
Well, they will need local input. They won't be able to do it all from.
I know, but we need to
central
reinforce that
office
that's
in
important to us, and I think as Anne is pointing out, that's important to us that be made extremely clear.
I think also under that one, and maybe we need a diagram, it's very, very complex, because take notifiable diseases, which is the example we use in section 13, the DHB needs to know that because they need to have the response side of it done. The regulator needs to know it. We want a one-stop shop. We don't want them having two separate databases, but that information is used by a number of different people for different purposes and needs to be. And so, you know, I think when you've got the whole picture and all of these, we've got to make sure that everyone's got access to the same information at the same time. And we even use a notifiable. Admittedly, we get it from the DHB, but it's very useful for us when we're looking at what's happening across the organisation. So I think what we're trying to recognise in there, it's a very complex, but we're better to have you in charge of this and you in charge, and we have access to that rather than us trying to do a whole pile of duplication. Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Anne. Melanie, Tim, have you got one? Or were you stretching?
I'm just going to talk about the cost of this, even though it's not the only thing. I think, you know, the summary or conclusion we've got doesn't mention anything about that, and that could be a big issue. And I think all of those paragraphs should be strengthened with what we want to see. It just states that something's is absent from the bill, and we need to say that what we want.
What we want, I think so too.
You know.
Yeah. So, just going forward on this, I know it has to be in by the 4th of March. could we set up a subcommittee here, or just a few representatives from the committee with delegated authority, just to look at the changes we've suggested today and sign that off, even if it's by email next week? Yep. So can we put that down? And have I got any interest on being on that? I think Melanie and myself. Good, is it? And and James. Is everyone happy with that? Melanie. Shall we swap Andrew? Andrew, do you want to?
If the mayor's going to be there and if you're going to be there as the chair,
Yeah, so we'll take Andrew
I'm
out.
comfortable with the other names, I don't need to be there.
Yeah, take Andrew out and put Melanie in there. Or her nominee. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. Melanie Cooker. The Melanie, yeah. Oh, the Melanie. Oh. All right. So that would be by the third. Are you happy with that, Sarah and John and Ellen? You right? So if you can just make some changes, strengthen what we've said, and include in the conclusion what Melanie suggested there, I think you've got the gist of it. All right.
More questions. One is around the rural supplies. I see that there's a whole power around rural supply, and given we've got the peninsula, that's probably an area that we should be commenting on, because that's been a huge incurred cost forced on us, and it would be good if there was schemes set up for rural supplies that we were involved. And the second one is, have we got a strategic campaign to get other groups submitting in support of the points that we're making locally, given how important water is?
Yes, so we have, we've spoken with other local authorities and shared our submission points, and when there wasn't an early draft, to assist them in making their own submissions.
But I mean, people like the health ministry, the local health people, community groups, etc. in Christchurch.
Maybe that's something that should go out through the community boards, providing a link to the submission.
I mean, I've previously raised it. I think we need a strategic campaign around not being forced to have chlorine in our water. And we should be taking every opportunity we get to stimulate people to make submissions to reinforce that point to government. Otherwise, we're going to lose this battle.
All right, well, we can do that. All right, is there any more questions? No? Any discussion? Has it been moved and seconded? To the mover? Thanks, James. Seconded, Mike. Any further discussion? No? I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed? That's carried. Thank you for the work on this. Thank you. And we'll look forward to receiving an email next week. And then we move. Sorry, Aaron's against.